Welcome back to Long COVID Doctor, an educational series for those of you with long COVID who are still suffering. I'm Dr. Tim Robinson, formerly a family doctor, GP for 30 years, now working in Long COVID Services for 5 years. I post on all the usual podcast channels as well as on YouTube. I hope you find my postings helpful, and if you do, obviously click subscribe because I want to get the information out to as many of you long COVID sufferers as possible. My usual disclaimer is, of course, any of the treatments, etc. that I mention in my podcasts and my YouTube postings should not be considered unless you've actually talked to your own doctor about this particular treatment or strategy, etc., before you embark on it. So just to make sure we're not missing something, make sure that we're practicing safe medicine. So yes, as I said, click subscribe to try and spread the word or share any of these postings to anyone that you know who has long COVID. Just incidentally, thank you very much for all the comments and views, etc., and also the queries that you're sending in. Apologies in advance. I really haven't got the time to reply to each of these individually, but keep them coming, please, because they actually help me with my future postings, give me guidance and the heads up as to what you are looking for. So anyway, click subscribe, share, whatever. Thanks very much. So this is an update on dysautonomia in long COVID. Right, let's get there. I've divided the talk up into two parts, really to make it more sort of, if you like, digestible or less overwhelming, less tiring, because obviously I'm aware that a lot of you not only have long COVID fatigue, but also have long COVID brain fog, so cognitive impairment. So concentrating for long periods of time and information overload is not what you want. So in part one, I'll talk about the causes for the long COVID dysautonomia and what the patients are telling us, what they're experiencing, their symptoms with dysautonomia. In part two, I will then cover the treatments and the strategies we use and recommend and the ways that we're going to actually tackle this dysautonomia. So here we go, dysautonomia in long COVID. What is dysautonomia? The very, very important question to ask. So dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is an abbreviation of the phrase dysautonomia, dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. So abbreviated from dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, abbreviated down becomes dysautonomia. So what is the autonomic nervous system? So basically the autonomic nervous system is that part of the nervous system that controls our automatic bodily functions, such as heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, temperature control, digestion, gut control, bladder control. So these are all processes that happen without us thinking about it. They are involuntary. We don't think about, our heart rate. We don't think about our temperature control. It happens automatically, controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So it's not voluntary. Well, voluntary activity is sort of like, I'll raise my arm, I'll stand up and walk out of the door, or I'll take consciously a very deep breath. That's because I've told myself to do these things. I am in control of them. That is voluntary control. That's not what we're talking about with the autonomic nervous system, the involuntary control. So, what happens if you have dysautonomia? Well, let's focus on the cardiovascular system first of all. So that's the heart and the circulation system first of all. Firstly, the heart rate. Typically in dysautonomia, you've got a rapid heart rate, otherwise known as tachycardia. And that can be any time, day or night, when you're resting or when you're active. We have patients who say, I'm doing something or other, etc., and suddenly my heart rate goes crazy, goes accelerated, goes rapid. Or I'm lying and resting in bed and I can hear my heart beating really fast. Or indeed, some patients tell us that, they wake up in the middle of the night and their heart rate is just running along at 100, 120 beats a minute for no reason. It's not as if they've woken up from a nightmare. They just wake up and it's rattling along at that sort of rate. So, at rest or activity, day or night, rapid heart rate, tachycardia. Another cardiovascular feature of dysautonomia is a problem with blood pressure control. Typically, it's reduced blood pressure, so a dropping of the blood pressure. The next is POTS, another version of dysautonomia. Another sort of, if you like, a subgroup of dysautonomic. POTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So this is tachycardia again, like I mentioned just a minute ago, but this is tachycardia when you're standing up with prolonged standing, okay? Postural, so to do with posture. Orthostatic, which is a fancy word for standing up. Tachycardia, rapid heart rate, syndrome. That's the symptoms associated with this rapid heart rate when you're standing up. And then finally, in this cardiovascular section, is balance. A difficulty with your balance. Either feeling faint, lightheaded, or sort of a wobbliness, lightheaded, almost like you're going to black out. So those are the cardiovascular presentations. Those are the symptoms that patients are presenting to us who have dysautonomia. But, like I said, autonomic nervous system takes care of many other processes in our body happening automatically outside of our control. Involuntarily. So, breathing. So, patients with dysautonomia can have breathlessness. Temperature control can be lost. So, patients typically tell us, I have extreme cold intolerance now. I just can't keep warm. And classically, patients say, no matter how many layers I put on, I can't keep warm. Or conversely, I'm roasting all the time. I'm having hot flushes. I'm cooking. I'm baking. So a lot of patients in what we call the lead up to the menopause, a lot of female patients are saying, is my menopause happening early at 30, 35? Probably not, actually. And then there's nausea and ringing in the ears and head spinning. Again, all features of dysautonomia. Leading on from that, bowel problems. So a lot of irritable bowel type symptoms. So bloating, gassiness, gurgling, and sort of variation in bowel habit. All classic irritable bowel syndrome symptoms can be an effect of dysautonomia. Talked about bowel. What about bladder? Again, bladder control can be lost. Swinging out back up to the head. So headaches are very common in dysautonomia. So patients who've never had headaches don't have a headachy tendency. They're all of a sudden, since having COVID, now they're long COVID, they have recurrent, almost daily headaches that they've never had before. Those patients who have had migraine before they had COVID, have always lived with migraine on a sort of, if you like, intermittent from time to time basis, their migraines become completely uncontrolled, so frequent, much worse. And the preventative tablets that they're on, that they may have been prescribed prior to their long COVID, are no longer working. So whilst we're still on the head, the sleep problems. Sleep problems are very common in dysautonomia for a number of reasons. But, sleep problems are a common symptom, extremely common symptom in long COVID. And it is because, on the whole, mostly because of dysautonomia. Still in the head, in the neurological element of the brain, pain hypersensitivity. This is, again, common in dysautonomia, where patients experience pain off the scale, disproportionate to the level of what has brought about, to the level of the stimulus, what has triggered that pain. They're hypersensitive to pain, but they also have hypersensitivity to sounds, to smell, to taste. So sounds, even the mildest of sound will be exaggerated in their head and heard as like a deafening ringing of a bell or a clattering, etc. They just can't, tolerate these excessive sounds. And likewise, smells can be triggered because of the dysautonomic. And they become very intolerant with sort of, perfumes and cleaning product smells, etc. So there we are. It's quite a package of symptoms that our dysautonomic long COVID patients are telling us. Any of those symptoms. So what I'm saying is, yes, they do the cardiovascular ones, but any of them that I've just described could well be put down to dysautonomia. So, why does someone get dysautonomia? Well, in a way, it's a case of going back to square one, and that is looking at what happened when COVID virus came in and started to wreak its havoc on you and your system. Well, what's the sort of the underlying fundamental effect of COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2 virus? And that is inflammation, isn't it? Around the systemic circulation, around the whole body. So inflammation being kicked off in any of the cells around the body, in any of the tissues, or any of the organs, etc., etc. A consequence of the inflammation is what we call inflammation of the blood vessels, endothelialitis, okay? But also kicking off of something called mast cell activation, MCAS, as well as formation of microclots, as well as dysfunction of the immune system, leading to autoantibodies and imbalances of the key B cells, B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and the memory cells, the B and T memory cells. So that's what COVID has done to you, okay? It's caused all these problems. And as a consequence of all those processes, those pathophysiological processes that have gone on, then that results in damage. Well, this talks on autonomic nervous system, okay? So therefore, let's focus on where the autonomic nervous system originates from. Where does it reside? Where does it sit? Basically, it sits in the brainstem with so many different connections to so many different systems, both within the brain, but also around the body. So if you've got all those things happening, those damaging effects of COVID that's resulted in your long COVID, the inflammation, etc., 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 affecting the brainstem, then that affects those centers, those autonomic nervous system centers in the brainstem, which control heart rate, breathing, temperature control, pain regulation. So it's not surprising that in COVID you're going to have dysautonomia. Further than that, you've got damage to nerves, the nerves that are carrying those messages to the brainstem. So these are nerves that are all around the body. So those nerves can be damaged themselves. So the stimuli from the peripheries are fed up the nerves. And if the nerves are not functioning normally, then that can lead to dysautonomia. Also the nerve endings, in our fingertips, the pain receptors in our fingertips, the temperature receptors in our skin, if they are affected, and they can be affected by all sorts of processes, we call it small fiber neuropathy, or the microthrombi that are affecting those nerves, the microthrombi which are feeding the blood vessels that should be servicing those nerves and those nerve endings. If those little blood clots are there, then those nerve fibers or the receptors are not going to be functioning normally. Along with all that, then there's imbalance. Like I said, the autonomic nervous system, obviously, all the nuclei, the centers, are in the brainstem. But there are so many fibers shooting off and connecting with other parts of the brain. So the connections with the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So if that's disrupted, then that's going to cause an imbalance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. One is overactive, sympathetic, and the parasympathetic is underactive. An imbalance of that system. Dysautonomia. But also those connections between the brainstem and the limbic system within the brain. That's the emotional system as well as the memory system. So connecting with the hippocampus and hence short-term memory disruption, connections with the amygdala, so over compensation of the fear and fright and anxiety response, and also the connections with the prefrontal lobes, so the areas that are responsible for executive functions, for decision making, for problem solving. All these can be affected, and hence brain fog. So all these connections can be affected, plus also the connections with the endocrine system, so the glandular system. So it's all going wrong because of that initial COVID infection, causing the inflammation, causing the sort of the fallout of all those other systems. So someone with dysautonomia, so that in a way, someone with dysautonomia can have any number of those things happening at the same time. And consequently, then if all those systems are being affected, then you're going to have symptoms. I mean, everyone's different. Everyone's an individual. So the first person may have mostly the cardiac element to their dysautonomia. The next person might have more the sort of balance problems and nausea and ringing in the ears element of dysautonomia. The next person might only have gut problems that is presenting with their dysautonomia. But they may have, each of those three people, may have those key presentations as their presenting symptom for dysautonomia. But they may have, to a degree, those other symptoms that are presenting to do with headaches, say, to do with the bladder problems, to do with the breathing problems. So it's a real hodgepodge. And like I said, everyone's individual. But when a patient, in our clinics is saying, I'm getting all these different things happening at the same time, it does sort of raise our suspicion and makes us suspect that dysautonomia may be occurring. So, what are we doing? What are we going to do about it? Okay, well, like I've said before in other podcasts and YouTubes, basically we need to ask for help. Okay, any new symptom, anything that's not working properly, that's bringing some concern and impacting on your daily life, you need to talk to your doctor. You need to talk to your family physician, your family doctor. We mustn't assume, because you've got these new symptoms, that they are necessarily due to long COVID. Let's not be long COVID blind. No, those new symptoms may be something completely unrelated. So, it's important to take those symptoms to your doctor. We've got to get a diagnosis, and the doctor will do that. How does the doctor do that? Basically, gets the history, finds out the symptoms and all the different features to those symptoms, and the context and the time frame and other associated symptoms. Just gets the whole story. And that then probably leads to, well, hopefully there will be an examination, a physical examination. So pulse, certainly if it's a cardiovascular type story, then the GP is going to want to measure the pulse, the heart rate and the blood pressure, of course, understandably. If it's more breathlessness, etc., maybe listen to the lungs. If there are abdominal symptoms, like I was saying, if an IBS type scenario is happening, the doctor's hopefully going to want to examine the abdomen. Then, depending on what the doctor discovers from the history and the examination, the doctor will then request some investigations. And that might be blood tests, looking for anemia or thyroid problems or kidney problems, or looking for, chest x-ray, or looking for cardiac causes, maybe do an ECG, maybe ask for an ultrasound if it's an abdominal symptom. There's lots that the GP can investigate. The GP all along will be making sure that, from the history examination, there are no red flags. So, chest pain or unexplained breathlessness or change in bowel habit, or difficulties with passing urination. These are all symptoms that the GP will want to, do that mental checklist thing. Is this serious? Is this rapid weight loss? It's got to be explained. So the GP is looking for those red flags, looking for those things that could be indicators of something a little bit more serious. And as a consequence, having been through that whole process, or maybe discovering some red flags, the GP may say, actually, I think I need a specialist opinion here. Maybe the GP will refer you on to a cardiologist or a neurologist for those unexplained new headaches. Yeah, that's reasonable. Or gastroenterologist, like I said, change in bowel habit, is a red flag for no other reason. Change of bowel habit for no other reason is a red flag. And, we've got to exclude sinister pathology. Is it a bowel tumour presenting? Yes, you've got long COVID as well. But hold on, this is to be taken seriously because it's a change in bowel habit. Let's not put it down to COVID, long COVID. Let's make sure that we've excluded anything more serious first. So, it feels like I've really been talking hard about the causes for your, long COVID dysautonomia. You're probably asking, well, why is he going to such depth and detail about this? Well, basically, it's because it's really important we know what we're dealing with. It's really important that we have a diagnosis, with a diagnosis, we know how best to treat the problems. And understanding the causes actually brings you peace of mind, but also helps your own validation. Causes are real. They're research, evidence-based. Palpitations are due to the effects of the COVID on the cardiovascular system. It's, palpitations, let's not just put them down to panic and anxiety, which a number of the cynics and skeptics and gaslighters will say and falsely accuse long COVID patients of having, No, it is a reality. It's not all imaginary. It's not all on their head. So that validation is so important, to support your cause. And also it helps your own acceptance of what's going on. And that also brings peace of mind. So there we are. Lot to take on board there. And that brings me to the end of this part 1. Okay, dysautonomia in long COVID and what our patients are experiencing and the causes. In part 2, I talk about how we're going to tackle them, the treatments and the strategies. So I'll see you there, hopefully. All the best. See you later.